The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council was a sight to behold. Massive crystal columns reached toward a ceiling painted with the stars of 1,000 worlds. Delegates from over 200 species sat in tiered sections, each platform designed to accommodate wildly different body types, from the gaseous mist people of Xantor to the silicon-based rock creatures of Graphis Prime. Ambassador Jisoo Lee sat at the human delegation's table, her back straight and face composed despite the tension in the room. She wore the navy blue uniform of the United Earth Federation, adorned with silver pins that marked her 20 years of diplomatic service. At 53, she had spent more time in alien environments than on Earth itself. "The terms are reasonable, Ambassador Lee," said High Counselor Tseek, his 8 eyes blinking in sequence. His species, the Voldarians, had controlled the Council for over 4,000 years. Humans must understand their place in the galactic community. Jisoo took a slow breath. She glanced at her team. Dr. Sung, the xenobiologist, Colonel Hyun, the military attaché, and J1, her chief of staff. They all gave her the same small nod. The decision had been unanimously approved by Earth's leadership weeks ago, but the Council didn't know that yet. "The proposal requires us to surrender 90% of our mining rights in the Orient sector," Jisoo said, her voice calm but firm. "It restricts our ships from using Class 4 jump gates without Council approval. It imposes tariffs on human goods that are 3 times higher than those on any other species, and it demands access to all our research databases while giving us limited access to yours." Seek's skin rippled in what humans had learned was an expression of dismissal. "Your species has been part of the galactic community for barely 2 centuries. The elder races have maintained peace for 50,000 years. Your rapid expansion causes concern." Jisoo closed her data tablet and placed it in her bag. This small gesture caught the attention of the nearest delegates, who watched with confusion. "Humans have proven our value repeatedly," Jisoo continued. "When the plague of Deneb threatened 16 worlds, it was human scientists who developed the cure. When the Krell Hive attempted to invade Council space, human warships formed the front line. We have earned our place at this table through blood and innovation." The Arcturian delegate waved a glowing tentacle. "We acknowledge those contributions, but your species moves too quickly, develops technologies too rapidly. The Council system is built on careful balance." Jisoo looked around the chamber, making eye contact with as many delegates as possible. Some shifted uncomfortably. A few, mainly representatives of newer species, nodded subtly. "The United Earth Federation has heard your terms," she announced, rising from her seat. Her voice carried throughout the chamber, enhanced by the room's perfect acoustics. "We find them unacceptable. Humanity will be withdrawing from these negotiations and recalling all diplomatic personnel from Council space effective immediately." A wave of murmurs swept through the chamber. No species had ever walked away from Council negotiations. The system wasn't designed for it. Compliance was assumed. "You cannot simply leave," sputtered Delegate Onge of the Pax Collective, his collar flaps extending in alarm. "The economic consequences are being calculated as we speak," Jisoo cut in. "But they will affect the Council far more than Earth. 96% of medical nanites used in Council space come from human factories. 62% of your food is grown using human agricultural techniques, and I don't need to remind you that the last 3 major military threats to Council space were defeated primarily by human forces." The human delegation stood as one and began gathering their materials. J1 handed Jisoo a small device, which she placed on the table. "This contains our official notice of withdrawal from Council proceedings. We will begin evacuating our citizens from Council worlds immediately. We expect all Council citizens on human worlds to depart within 30 standard days." The ancient Voldarian counselor's facial membranes pulsed rapidly, a sign of extreme anxiety rarely seen in public. "Ambassador Lee, perhaps we have been hasty. We could reconvene after a short recess." "No," Jisoo said simply. "For 30 years, Humans have tried to work within this system. We have compromised, appeased, and sacrificed. No longer. As the human delegation filed toward the grand doors, panicked conversations broke out across the chamber. The Delvian Minister of Trade was already frantically calling his homeworld. The Uthian military representative was shouting urgent orders into a communicator. Outside the chamber, Colonel Hyun moved beside Jisoo. "It's done, then." "Yes," Jisoo nodded. "Phase 1 complete. Are our ships ready?" "All human military vessels are implementing Plan Exodus as we speak," he confirmed. "The trading guilds were notified an hour ago." Dr. Sung looked worried. "The Council won't take this lying down. They've never faced a situation like this." "That's exactly why it will work," Jisoo said as they boarded their shuttle. "Their entire system is built on the assumption that everyone wants to be part of their club. They've never considered what happens when someone walks away." As their shuttle lifted off from the Council Tower, emergency lights were already flashing throughout the massive structure. Communication buoys were lighting up as urgent messages raced to hundreds of worlds. Jisoo looked back at the gleaming spire growing smaller behind them. For nearly 300 years, humanity had tried to earn equal standing in a system rigged against newcomers. Now they would forge their own path. "Send the signal to all human worlds and outposts," she instructed J1. "Operation Independence is now active." Across Council space, human ships began changing course. Mining operations initiated shutdown sequences. Research stations archived their data and prepared for evacuation. The Council had never imagined humans would simply walk away. They were about to learn how big a mistake that was. Admiral Jin-Ho Kim stood at the wide viewport of the hegemony flagship, Eternal Vigilance. His four-striped uniform was impeccably pressed, but dark circles under his eyes betrayed 3 sleep cycles of constant worry. The massive ship hung in orbit around Outpost 227, once a bustling human mining colony. Now it was empty. "Another one, sir," said Lieutenant Min, entering the observation deck with a data tablet. "The Rigel 9 station. Completely abandoned." Admiral Kim didn't turn from the viewport. Below, the outpost building stood intact but dark. No movement, no energy signatures. Just another ghost town in an increasingly ghostly sector of space. "How long since the last human was seen there?" he asked. According to local traffic records, their evacuation shuttle departed 14 days ago. But here's the strange part. There was no evacuation order filed with the sector administration. They just decided to leave. Kim finally turned, taking the tablet from his aide. The images showed empty corridors, vacant control rooms, and blank screens. Not a single personal item remained. No photos, no trinkets, not even trash. "They've stripped it clean," he murmured. Again. This pattern had repeated across 3 full spiral arms of the galaxy. Human colonies, outposts, research stations, and trading depots, all methodically abandoned. The evacuation was happening with such discipline that most Council worlds didn't notice until critical supply shortages began. "Sir," said Lieutenant Min, lowering his voice though they were alone. "The Council wants answers I cannot give them." Humans were operating 67% of all freight in the Orion Arm. The economic impact. "I know the numbers," Kim interrupted. He had been reviewing them for weeks. "The Mulderry worlds are already reporting food shortages. The pharmaceutical distribution networks are collapsing in the outer systems." Kim walked to the holographic display at the center of the room and activated it. A 3-dimensional map of Council space materialized, with red dots showing former human locations. "What troubles me more is this," he said, tapping a command. The display shifted to show military patrol routes. 8 border sectors previously monitored by human defense forces are now completely unguarded. Min's eyes widened. The Krell could exploit that weakness. The Krell, the Swarm, the Void Collective, take your pick of enemies who might notice our suddenly porous borders. The door slid open again, and Commander Park entered, looking troubled. "Admiral, "We've completed the scan of the outpost's systems," she reported. "They didn't just pack up their belongings. They took everything of value: manufacturing equipment, quantum computers, even their hydroponic systems." "Did they leave anything?" Kim asked. "Basic life support and structural integrity. Nothing more." Kim nodded. This matched the pattern they had seen elsewhere. The humans weren't destroying anything. They were simply taking what belonged to them and leaving. It was entirely legal, yet somehow felt more threatening than an act of war. "And their military positions?" the Admiral asked, though he suspected the answer. Commander Park's expression grew even more concerned. "That's what's troubling, sir. They've withdrawn from all border stations as expected, but our deep space tracking has lost all signatures of their capital ships. They haven't returned to Earth or any known colonies. They're just gone." Kim exchanged a look with his officers. The implications were disturbing. The human navy wasn't small. 36 capital ships, hundreds of destroyers, thousands of support vessels. A force that size couldn't simply vanish. "Could they be using some new cloaking technology?" suggested Min. "Possibly," Kim said. "But my instinct says no. This is something else." He returned to the viewport, gazing at the empty outpost below. In his 300 years of military service, Admiral Kim had fought in 6 major conflicts. He had faced the Krell hive mind and survived an encounter with the dreaded Void Collective. But nothing unsettled him like this silent, orderly withdrawal. "They're planning something," he said quietly. Later that night, in his private quarters, Kim reviewed classified reports from across Council space. Human diplomatic compounds, emptied. Human-owned businesses, sold or closed. Human students in Council universities, all transferred or withdrawn. His personal communicator chimed. The caller ID showed Grand Counselor Teak himself. "Admiral." The Voldarian's face appeared, his 8 eyes blinking nervously. "Have you discovered where the humans have gone?" "No, Counselor. We've tracked some civilian ships back to their home system, but most are simply missing." Seek's membrane fluttered in agitation. "This is unacceptable. The Council requires answers." "With respect, Counselor, perhaps the Council should consider why the humans left in the first place." The Voldarian's eyes narrowed. "Your species has always had too much sympathy for the humans. Admiral, remember your oath to the hegemony." After the call ended, Kim stood and walked to his small viewport, looking out at the stars. His people, the Nori, had joined the Council 10,000 years ago. They were considered an elder race now, respected and established. But he still remembered the stories his grandfather told of their early years, the struggle for recognition, the unfair trade terms, the casual dismissal of their concerns. His console beeped with an urgent message. A human merchant vessel had been located at the edge of the Cygnus Void, a region of space the Council had declared off-limits centuries ago. "What are you up to?" Kim murmured, staring at the report. 3 days later, the Admiral's shuttle approached an unmapped system deep in the neutral zone. He had come alone, against all protocols, following a set of coordinates delivered anonymously to his private terminal. As his shuttle emerged from hyperspace, he gasped. Hundreds of human ships floated in formation around an unremarkable red dwarf star. And they weren't alone. Vessels from a dozen non-Council species moved among them, exchanging goods and personnel. His communication system activated, showing the face of a human woman he recognized, Ambassador Lee's chief of staff. "Admiral Kim," said J1 with a slight smile. "We've been expecting you." Director Ta Wu Park adjusted his formal robes as he entered the Economic Council chamber. The room buzzed with anxious voices. 6 months had passed since humanity's unprecedented exit from the Galactic Council, and the consequences were becoming impossible to ignore. "Director Park, is it true about the Centauri shipping network?" called out Representative Gluick as Park made his way to the central podium. Park gave a small nod but saved his full response for the official presentation. The Centauri conglomerate, which had controlled nearly 30% of shipping in the coreward sectors, had declared bankruptcy that morning. Their stock had collapsed completely, wiping out the wealth of investors across 12 systems. The chamber's lighting dimmed as Park reached the podium. He placed his palm on the scanner, and the massive holographic display activated above the central table. "Esteemed representatives," he began, his voice steady despite the grim data he was about to present. "I will not waste time with pleasantries. The economic situation has deteriorated beyond our initial projections." The hologram showed a swirling galaxy map with red spots indicating economic distress. 6 months ago, there had been a handful of red dots. Now, entire spiral arms glowed an angry crimson. "The Centauri bankruptcy is only the beginning," Park continued. "Our analysis indicates that at least 7 major trading houses will fail within the next 30 days. Murmurs of alarm spread through the chamber. A Trillian representative rose from her cushion, her feathers puffed in distress. "My world's precision manufacturing sector is on the verge of complete collapse," she said. "Without human rare earth imports, our factories sit idle. Millions are unemployed." Park nodded sympathetically. "The Trillian situation is unfortunately common. 17 council worlds are experiencing similar crises." He touched another control, and the display shifted to show economic trend lines. All pointed sharply downward. "The Council's emergency reserves were substantial," Park said, "but they were designed to handle localized disasters, not galaxy-wide disruption." From the Elder Species section, Councillor Vreen made a dismissive gesture with his upper limbs. "Surely we can replace human trade networks. Their territory comprised barely 3% of Council space." Director Park took a deep breath. The elder races, with their millennium-spanning lives, often fail to understand the immediate concerns of younger species. Their wealth, accumulated over countless generations, insulated them from short-term hardships. "With respect, Counselor," Park replied, "human trade impact far exceeded their territorial footprint. Their ships made up 64% of independent freighters. Their merchants were willing to serve low-profit routes that major conglomerates ignored. Their banking houses provided loans to businesses the Council Financial Authority deemed high risk." He changed the display again, showing pricing data that made several representatives gasp. "Without human innovation driving competitive markets, monopolistic practices have resurged among the elder species corporations. Prices for essential goods have increased by an average of 342% in regions formerly serviced by human traders." The Delvian representative stood up, his normally blue skin pale with worry. 3 systems in my sector are petitioning for emergency aid. Their economies were heavily dependent on human markets. Food shortages have begun on the outer colonies." Park nodded grimly. "The Council Relief Fund is processing their requests, but our resources are stretched thin." A heavy thud echoed through the chamber as Councillor Gresh slammed his massive appendage onto the table. The ancient Bolteri rarely spoke at economic meetings, but when he did, everyone listened. "Enough of these statistics," he roared. "Where did they go? An entire species doesn't just disappear. They must be somewhere, trading with someone." The chamber fell silent, all eyes turning to Director Park. He had hoped to avoid this topic until the closed security session later, but Gresh's outburst forced his hand. "Our intelligence suggests," Park replied carefully, choosing each word with precision, "that they've established a parallel economy beyond the Orion Spur, trading extensively with non-council species we previously considered insignificant." The silence that followed was deafening. For thousands of years, the Council had treated the unclaimed territories beyond the Orion Spur as irrelevant, home to primitive species unworthy of diplomatic relations. The idea that humans had established viable economic networks there was shocking. "Impossible," muttered Councillor Vreen. "The outer territories lacked the infrastructure for meaningful commerce." "They lacked infrastructure," corrected Park. "Recent scout reports indicate substantial development. New jump gates have appeared in at least 6 systems. Space stations are under construction in areas where no significant activity had been recorded for centuries." He brought up an intercepted trading log showing transactions between human merchants and species many counselors didn't even recognize: Tauri, Nixilians, drift collectives, free pact worlds. Most concerning, Park continued, is evidence that the humans are sharing advanced technologies with these non-council entities. Technologies they previously claimed not to possess when asked to share with council scientific committees. This revelation sent a wave of angry muttering through the chamber. The council's technology-sharing protocols were strict, designed to maintain the elder race's advantages. The thought of advanced tech flowing freely outside their control was deeply disturbing to many. Representative Mila of the Centrist Confederacy, one of the younger council members, raised a tentative hand. Perhaps we should consider opening diplomatic channels with these outer territories, if trade is flourishing there. Absolutely not, interrupted Councillor Vreen. We do not negotiate with separatists or technology proliferators. Director Park watched the debate escalate. He'd been born on a colony world near the human border and had worked with many Earth merchants in his youth. He had seen this crisis coming long before most. The Council's treatment of humanity had been short-sighted at best, deliberately oppressive at worst. As the councillors argued, his private communicator vibrated subtly against his wrist. The message displayed on his implant was brief but stunning. Proposal ready. Meeting set. The Nexus Station. Tomorrow. It was signed. Ambassador Lee. Park kept his expression neutral as the debate raged around him. The council didn't yet realize they were no longer setting the agenda. For the first time in 10,000 years, they would have to respond to events rather than dictate them. And he suspected humanity was just getting started. The Great Security Chamber of the Galactic Council was designed to impress and intimidate. Its 50-meter ceiling depicted ancient battles won by Council forces. The walls displayed weapons taken from defeated enemies. The massive round table, carved from the heartwood of an extinct alien tree, was reserved for only the highest-ranking representatives of the 1,000-year-old alliance. Today, that imposing chamber felt much smaller as voices rose in anger and fear. We must re-establish contact immediately, insisted Ambassador Su-Jin Choi of the Conclave. Her normally calm voice edged with urgency. At 200 years old, she was considered young among council diplomats, but her reputation for level-headed analysis had earned her respect. Offer concessions, diplomatic recognition, whatever they require. She stood at her place at the table, hands planted firmly on its polished surface. Her formal blue robes, marking her as a member of the moderate conclave faction, contrasted with the militant red of many others in the chamber. Absurd, countered Representative Earthar, his scaled skin flushing orange with anger. We should demonstrate our military capabilities near their core worlds. Remind them of their place. The 7-foot reptilian slammed his fist down, making data tablets jump. Several elder species nodded in agreement. The humans respect only strength, continued Earthar. Their withdrawal is a bluff. They cannot survive without council markets. Ambassador Choi shook her head. That thinking is exactly what created this crisis. We have underestimated them repeatedly. Councillor Minho, head of the Security Committee, watched the argument with growing concern. For the 4th consecutive day, the emergency session had devolved into shouting. The calm, orderly proceedings that had been the Council's hallmark for millennia were collapsing under the pressure of the human departure. Perhaps, suggested Representative XL of the Frex Commonality, we should consider limited military action. Not an invasion, but a blockade of Earth's home system. Su-Jin turned to him, eyes narrowed. With what ships, Representative? Our border patrols are already stretched thin covering the sectors the human fleet abandoned. The Delvian Armada, began Excel, is busy protecting their own trade routes from pirates, finished Su-Jin. Pirates using ships that mysteriously resemble outdated human vessels. Minho raised his hand for silence. As one of the longest-serving members of the elder races, his authority was rarely questioned. The room quieted. "Let us review the facts without emotion," he said, his deep voice resonating through the chamber. "It has been 8 months since humanity withdrew from Council space. In that time, our economic situation has worsened beyond all projections. 3 member species now face food shortages severe enough to threaten civil unrest." He touched a control, and a holographic map appeared above the table. "More concerning are these developments at our borders," he continued, highlighting several systems near the Orion Spur. "Several previously unaligned civilizations have formed mutual defense pacts with humanity." The map zoomed in to show increased ship traffic between Earth's colonies and worlds like Tauri Prime, Nexilus, and the Drift Collective. Advanced human technology they seemingly hid from Council inspectors for decades, is appearing in previously underdeveloped regions. Ambassador Choi nodded grimly. "The Tauri were considered a minor species 2 years ago. Now they have jump gate technology and antimatter power plants." "This is outrageous," exploded Earther. "The humans have violated every technology sharing protocol in the Galactic Charter. A charter that no longer binds them," Su Jin reminded him quietly. "They withdrew from all agreements when they left." The debate might have escalated further, but a junior aide rushed into the chamber, a breach of protocol that drew shocked stares. "Forgive the interruption," the young Farian stammered, his translucent skin pulsing with anxiety. "But urgent news from Sector 19. The Krell Hive has launched an incursion across the border at 3 points." The room fell silent. The Krell, insectoid conquerors who had threatened Council space for millennia, had been contained but never defeated. The heavily fortified border between their territory and the Council had been maintained largely by human military forces. "How many ships?" asked Minho, his voice steady despite the shocking news. "Early reports suggest over 200 vessels, Counselor." Earther's scales paled to a sickly yellow. "The border defenses are at 40% capacity since human forces withdrew," completed the aide. Minho rose from his seat. "This meeting is temporarily adjourned. The Military Response Committee will convene immediately in Command Center Alpha." As the security officials filed out, Ambassador Choi remained seated, her expression troubled. The young aide approached her hesitantly. "Ambassador, there's a private message for you," he said, offering a secure data chip. "It arrived via diplomatic courier moments ago." Alone in the chamber, Su Jin inserted the chip into her personal reader. The message was brief but sent a chill through her. "The Krell incursion is a feint. Watch the Sylvani corridor." An old friend. The signature code belonged to Ju Su Lee, the human ambassador who had walked away from the Council 8 months earlier. Su Jin quickly accessed the secure military network from her station. The Sylvani corridor was a strategic pathway cutting through Council space, connecting several major worlds. If the Krell took that route while the Council was distracted by the border incursion, her blood ran cold as she realized what was happening. She rushed from the chamber toward the command center, but was stopped by 2 junior representatives in the hallway. "Ambassador Choi," said one, a Navorian whose world had recently suffered economic collapse. "We represent 17 junior species who wish to speak with you privately." "This is not the time," Su Jin said, trying to move past them. "It is exactly the time," insisted the other, a Moldovan whose crystalline form shimmered with determination. "The elder species have failed us. We are considering following humanity's example." Su Jin froze, staring at them in shock. "You're talking about leaving the Council." "We're talking about survival," replied the Navorian grimly. "The humans offered us membership in their Orion cooperative yesterday. Full technology sharing, equal voting rights, no tiered membership." The implication struck Su Jin like a physical blow. This wasn't just about humans leaving anymore. The entire Council structure, the political organization that had maintained galactic stability for 50,000 years, was beginning to fracture. And somewhere beyond the Orion Spur, she suspected Ji Su Lee was watching it all unfold exactly as planned. The grand chamber of the Galactic Council had changed in 3 years. The magnificent crystal panels that once shimmered with light now appeared dull. The mighty insignia of the Thousand-Year Alliance hung slightly crooked on the far wall. Even the air felt different, stale, as if the environmental systems were operating at minimum capacity to save resources. Ambassador Mai Yum Kang noticed these details as she walked the center aisle toward the speaker's platform. Her steps were measured and confident. The dark blue uniform of the United Earth Federation had been replaced by a simple white suit bearing the new emblem, a spiral galaxy with a bright star at its edge. Representatives from over 100 species watched her progress in silence, some with curiosity, others with poorly disguised hostility. A few, mostly from younger species, with something that looked like hope. "The human returns," whispered an elder Voldarian to his aide, loudly enough for Mai Young to hear. "Come to beg for raid mission, no doubt." Mai Young showed no reaction to the comment. At 56, she had spent 30 years in diplomatic service. She had faced worse than whispers during the tense negotiations that had consumed the past 3 years. She reached the central platform and placed her palm on the authentication scanner. The system recognized her biometrics instantly. The Council had never bothered to remove human profiles from their database. The large holographic display activated behind her, showing a new political map of the galaxy. "Distinguished representatives," Mai Yum began, her voice clear and strong. "I come before you today not as a petitioner seeking red mission to the Council, but as the appointed representative of the Orion Cooperative." She gestured to the holographic map, where a significant portion of the galaxy's outer rim now glowed with a distinct blue light, separate from the green that marked Council territory. "Our alliance now comprises 37 spacefaring civilizations, operating entirely outside Council jurisdiction. Together, we represent over 2 trillion sentient beings and control 11% of known habitable worlds." The chamber erupted in murmurs. Many representatives activated their own data tablets, frantically searching for information on this new political entity. The cooperative had operated in near secrecy during its formation, with news of its existence tightly controlled until this moment. "Impossible," declared Councillor Vreen, rising from his seat. "The outer territories lack the infrastructure and technological base for such an alliance." Mai Young smiled slightly. 3 years ago, that was true. It is no longer the case. She touched a control, and the display shifted to show economic data. Trade routes between formerly insignificant worlds now pulsed with activity. New jump gates, space stations, and manufacturing centers had appeared across previously undeveloped regions. "Humanity never sought conflict," she continued, addressing the solemn gathering. "We sought fair treatment and recognition of sovereignty, values we found shared by many civilizations beyond Council space." From the junior species section, a Tauri representative stood. "The cooperative offered my people equal membership from day one. No probationary period. No restricted voting rights. No technology embargoes. The results speak for themselves." The display shifted again to show the Tauri homeworld. Once a struggling colony barely maintaining a space program, it was now a thriving center of commerce with orbital facilities that rivaled those of mid-tier Council worlds. "This is a violation of natural order," sputtered an elder Zithian, his eye stalks waving in agitation. "Younger species must be guided, their access to dangerous technologies carefully managed." "That mindset," Mai Young replied calmly, "is precisely why 43% of all spacefaring civilizations now reject Council membership." The number hung in the air like a physical blow. 3 years ago, the Council had represented nearly 90% of known spacefaring species. Their dominance had seemed eternal and unshakable. Mai Young moved to the next stage of her presentation. "I have been authorized to present terms for formal diplomatic relations between the Orion Cooperative and the Galactic Council." She displayed a simple document, just 3 pages, in stark contrast to the 1,000-page treaties the Council typically produced. "The terms are straightforward. The Council acknowledges the cooperative as a sovereign political entity. Both organizations agree to non-interference in each other's internal affairs. Free trade is established between our territories, with no punitive tariffs or embargoes. She paused, letting the simplicity of the proposal sink in. These terms are non-negotiable. The Council can establish normalized relations with the cooperative as equals, or continue to watch its economic and political influence diminish as more species defect to our alliance. The chamber erupted into chaos. Arguments broke out between elder and junior species. Accusations of human treachery competed with calls for immediate acceptance of the terms. Economic advisors huddled with security experts, frantically analyzing potential outcomes. Grand High Counselor Tseek, leader of the Council for over 600 years, raised his ancient appendages for silence. The room gradually quieted. The Council will need time to consider these terms, he announced. We will recess for 3 days to consult with our respective governments. As representatives filed out of the chamber, the Grand High Counselor approached Mai Young privately. His 8 eyes studied her with an intensity that had once intimidated her. Now she met his gaze steadily. You knew this would happen, the ancient alien observed, his voice lowered so only she could hear. From the moment Ambassador Li walked out 3 years ago, you planned for this outcome all along. Mai Young smiled diplomatically. We simply recognize something the Council forgot long ago. True power lies not in domination, but in choice. You tried to leave us no choices, so we created our own. The species who choose to work with us do so freely, as equals. Tseek's membrane fluttered, a sign of deep thought among his kind. And if we refuse your terms, then nothing changes, Mai Young replied simply. The cooperative continues to grow. More species join us each month. More resources flow through our trade networks instead of yours. She gestured to a small group of junior council members watching them from across the room. They're already speaking with our representatives about membership applications. The Navorians will vote on leaving the council next week. The Delvians the week after. For the first time in her memory, Mai Young saw something like uncertainty in the ancient counselor's eyes. This isn't how the galaxy is supposed to work, he said, almost to himself. We've maintained order for 50,000 years. Perhaps, Mai Young suggested gently, it's time for a new order, one built on mutual respect rather than hierarchical control. 3 days later, when the council reconvened, Mai Young stood at the same platform as the votes were tallied. The results were closer than anyone had predicted. 56% in favor of accepting the cooperative's terms. As she signed the historic agreement on behalf of humanity and 36 other species, Mai Young thought of Ambassador Li and that fateful day 3 years ago. One decisive action, walking away from an unfair table, had changed the course of galactic history. Sometimes the most powerful move wasn't fighting the system, it was building a better one.